No matter how well you plan an adventure, unexpected things will happen. That's part of the fun, but it's also part of the challenge. In this video, I'm going to look at some of the situations that I've seen come up again and again and try to make some suggestions about how best you can deal with them. One tricky situation that comes up again and again is that a player can't make it to a session. This is fine, we all lead really busy lives and sometimes someone just can't be there. Now when that happens, you have a few options. The first one is to allow somebody else to take control of the character for the session. That could be you as the dungeon master. You'll probably do a reasonable job of keeping the character safe, but the truth is you've got enough to do already running the game, so it can be quite hard to also control a character. That means that alternatively, you could ask one of the other players to control the character. They might know them quite well if the group play together regularly. However, the second player might not take quite as good a care of the character as would normally be the case, and that can lead to some slightly awkward follow-up sessions. So Frank, you weren't able to be here last week, and Bob controlled your character.
Oh, okay. How did it go, Bob? Bob?
Oh, you're dead.
What?
You were impaled by an enchanted baguette.
Another option, which I first encountered when playing in somebody else's campaign, is to have the character become a cardboard cutout. Now this is metaphorical, but effectively the character is now a sort of standee that's tucked underneath another character's arm and just sort of carried around for the adventure. They take no part, but they're kept completely safe. Some players will really dislike this because it breaks the immersion. Now, there's a fantastic games designer called Alessio Cavatori, and I heard him explain a variation on this that he's used, and I plan to shamelessly steal it myself. He always starts his campaigns by having a demon put some sort of curse on the group. And the effect of this curse is that at any point, the players could vanish from the material plane and be taken off somewhere else. That's perfect. A player doesn't turn up, the curse comes into effect. It deals with the player not being there without breaking the immersion of the game. I think it's a really clever idea. Now, it wouldn't have to be just a demon. If you're playing a science fiction game, perhaps there's some sort of breach in reality. Q, that sort of powerful entity from Star Trek, might bend time and space and the character disappears. Whatever game you're playing, you could find a variation on this. And I do think it's a really clever idea. But essentially, those are your choices. Someone will play the character because the player is missing, or you have to have the character pop out of existence in some way. Your choice, but killing a character when the player is not there does not go well. I would say at all costs, try to avoid that. The next problem that you might have to deal with is that you present a problem to the players, what you would consider a plot hook, and they just don't care. You prise up the floorboards, and underneath is an ancient map of an island, and drawn right in the centre is an X.
See the match last night?
Yeah, Chelsea were robbed.
Sometimes this is fine. The players do not have to bite at every plot hook. In fact, in my games, I like to put more leads in than the players could possibly ever follow, because it creates a sense of the world being larger than they are. They can't be everywhere at once. But if you really want the players to pick up on a lead, the best way to do that is to avoid making it too generic. As you near the village, you see the source of the smoke. A caravan that's been attacked by goblins. If you do decide to use one of the tried and tested tropes, try to add at least one unique quirk. So if the PCs discover a caravan that's been attacked, have one of the carriages balanced precariously over a cliff edge with pitiful mewling sounds coming from within. Or maybe one of the carriages is floating 100 feet up in the air because it contained an alchemist's wares and they were damaged during the attack and have mixed together to produce a weird magical effect. If you do something unusual, something unique, the players are far more likely to bite. Even better than this, though, is to make an encounter unique to a character. Let there be something about it which draws them in because they have a personal involvement in it. As you look at the map more carefully, you realise that there's a signature in the bottom left-hand corner, and that signature belongs to your mother.
What the hell? Shalindri's mother's been missing since she was a child. Let's get to that island.
If your PCs ultimately choose not to follow one of your carefully crafted plots, don't force them. It really is their choice. However, you can have them feel the consequences at some later date. For example, the next time they might seek out a sage for his wise counsel, have him be one of the people that was kidnapped by the goblins that the PCs couldn't be bothered to track down. You don't ever want to remove player agency, but you do want to make sure that they feel there are real consequences to the choices that they do or do not make. The next tricky situation that you might find yourself dealing with is a player who has memorised every single rule in every single book and expansion and expects to apply them no matter how absurd it might be in a particular situation.
On page 114 of Xanathar's Cauldron of Enchanted Underwear, it clearly states that you are immune to magical skid marks.
This is one situation that I myself find particularly annoying, and I've had a player who wanted his thief to hide at one side of a door and use sneak attack, then move 5 feet to the right, hide again and sneak, and do so for the whole of the battle again and again and again. And when I told him that this would be ridiculous, he told me that a dungeon master with whom he also played had done very much the same tactic with a group of dark elves who actually just switched places again and again and kept attacking. For me, that's preposterous and completely breaks the immersion of the game. These are not characters acting like anything in a believable world would. So I really would encourage you to make it clear to the players that the rules are the starting point, the framework for your games, for your creative adventures that you're going to have together. But there will be times when you as the Dungeon Master will say, no, I'm afraid that rule just doesn't make sense in this case. And don't just do it to the players. Make sure that the NPCs, the monsters, have the same set of rules. You won't use the rules against the players and you won't let them use them in unbelievable ways. I think if you're consistent and your players know that the story comes first, the fun comes first, then I think that most players will be fine to accept that. Another tricky situation, and this is one that I think is really difficult, is when a player becomes trapped in some way and isolated from the rest of the group. I would advise you not to include things in your adventure that are likely to do this. Putting a character in a pit, for example, and leaving them there for a session isn't really going to go very well. But the truth is, sometimes players will do it to themselves. They will decide that they are going to go somewhere and perhaps wait for something to happen, and it's never really going to happen. So, what are you going to do?
Well, of course I'm going to go into the Haunted Mansion and look around.
And you?
I'm going to stay outside and keep watch.
Really?
Guard duty.
The best way to avoid this happening is to try to let the player know that the activity they're choosing to do might result in them being out of the adventure for a while as they wait around. It's not always possible to do that because you might be giving away something about the adventure, but where you can, warn the player. Of course, he or she might decide to take the action anyway. I've certainly encountered a few quite stubborn players who are determined to sit and wait. You can drop hints, you can check in with them, but I think it's best that ultimately you say to them, your character isn't going to play much part in the adventure if you continue to do what you're doing. If they still want to do it, then fair enough, you've given them a chance and it really is their choice. If you know, because it's part of the adventure, that a certain character perhaps can't go somewhere, let's say some members of the group are likely to use stealth to sneak into an enemy camp, and the character who's wearing full plate mail is probably going to have to stay behind. You can see those sorts of situations coming, and I would always advise you to have a backup activity for that character. It's just not much fun if you plan the adventure so that somebody is going to be excluded for a long period of time. Try to avoid that whenever you can. The final situation I'd like to mention is related to the idea of an isolated party member. It's splitting the party. Now, this will inevitably happen at some time, and if one group are going off to do something and another group are going off to do something else, if the tasks are relatively short, it's not really a problem at all. But you as the Dungeon Master may have planned simultaneous parts of the adventure, so one group is going off here, one group is going off there. Now, when you do this, you're trying to keep everyone engaged, and it's not easy. I would advise you to try and use some of the narrative techniques used in other forms of storytelling. So when Group A goes off and does their task, you can either leave it on a cliffhanger, which is a good thing to do. You get to the point where the action is just about to get going, and then you cut and you go to the next group and you do the same sort of thing with them. You perhaps get to a cliffhanger and then you go back. That can work quite well. If you can't orchestrate a cliffhanger, then I would try to pause at a point where there's been some sort of revelation. Perhaps the players have learned something that changes the direction of the plot. Perhaps they've discovered some sort of mystery. But if they've discovered something that they can chew over, that they can think about, then as you change the focus to the other group, they will stay engaged. So cliffhangers and revelations are great when you have to split the party. So those are the tricky situations that I've encountered lots of times as a Dungeon Master. I hope that some of the solutions I've suggested will prove useful for you. I hope to see you again soon, and until then, keep rolling.